So often on this channel, we talk about things like the cost of living in Atlanta or like the pros and cons of living here. And so we kind of look at life in Atlanta from an objective point of view, but I want to take a look at Atlanta from more of a subjective point of view. Like, what is it really like to be here and be living here and like being among the people of Atlanta and like, doing daily, day to day tasks here in Atlanta. And so let's take a look at what it's really like to live in Atlanta, Georgia. One of the biggest things that determines what it's like to live here is whether you live in the city of Atlanta or in one of the suburbs of Atlanta. Those two things are very different. In the city, obviously, you have that urban lifestyle. Everything is super easy to walk to. You don't really need a vehicle. It's much more densely populated. In the suburbs, it's much less densely populated. You definitely need a vehicle to get around in the suburbs. And so which one of those two you are aiming for really has a big factor for what it's like to live here in the Metro Atlanta area. So there's definitely a lot of things that are unique about living here in Atlanta. If you have any questions about what it's like to live here or you're considering purchasing a home here, feel free to call, text, or email me anytime. Thank you so much to everybody who has reached out. I'm always happy to help. In the city of Atlanta, you tend to get much more variety of different viewpoints, different political viewpoints, much more diversity in the city of Atlanta. And then in the suburbs, you tend to get a little less racial diversity, probably less mix of viewpoints. However, it is super important to note that we do have a lot of suburbs around Atlanta. There's like something around 100 cities around the city of Atlanta that would be considered the suburbs, and you get a lot of different variety among each suburb individually. So in one city, in Marietta, you might not get a lot of different races or a lot of different viewpoints, but you have a lot of different suburbs that each have kind of like uniquely their own kind of viewpoints, or maybe you get more of a specific race in certain parts of Metro Atlanta and certain cities specifically. So that's really interesting to think about it and really an important part of living here in Metro Atlanta. For example, there's more of an Asian population in Gwinnett County than there is in Fayette County. And politically speaking, I'd say it's more conservative the farther away you go from Atlanta and more progressive the closer you are to Atlanta. So again, each suburb kind of has its own thing, but in the middle of Atlanta, you get a mix of all of the things, all of the political views, all of the races. The best food is definitely in the city of Atlanta because of this mix of diversity. And so that's one of the biggest differences between living outside of Atlanta and inside of Atlanta. Also, we commonly refer to this as ITP or OTP. We're simply referring to like the perimeter that goes around Atlanta 285, outside the perimeter or inside the perimeter. And then oftentimes people want to know, like, what are the people like? What are the neighbors like when you live in Atlanta? Are you dealing with like neighbors who don't want to talk to you? Or are you dealing with neighbors who are, super casual and Southern, and we've got that Southern hospitality? And I think for the most part, I would say that in the suburbs, you have a bit more family friendly Southern hospitality. I think you see that a little bit more in the suburbs. And then within the city of Atlanta, it tends to be a little less Southern hospitality. Maybe people are a little less neighborly. Now, it's not to say that the city of Atlanta is like super cold. I'm not saying that you shouldn't live in Atlanta. There are definitely lots of people who live in the city of Atlanta who are very neighborly, but naturally, when you live in a big city like Atlanta, it's going to be a little less neighborly, a little less warm and welcoming and inviting in the city of Atlanta, because there are many families who live in the suburbs of Atlanta. You tend to get that kind of Southern hospitality or that welcoming feeling a little bit more in the suburbs. In general, though, I would say that most people here in Metro Atlanta are very welcoming, very nice, very friendly. I don't think that it's like other parts of the US, other big cities in the US where people are a bit more standoffish. I think you will find that people tend to be more welcoming here in the Metro Atlanta area across the board, inside the perimeter, outside the perimeter, within the city of Atlanta or in the suburbs. People tend to be a bit more welcoming all around the Metro Atlanta area. And when it comes to safety, I would say all of Metro Atlanta is very safe. This may sound surprising to people who read the news or you see that Atlanta's in the news for some shooting, but the truth is what city is not in the news for some shooting going on? And if so, of course, it happens here in Atlanta, but it's not like I don't feel any kind of danger walking through the city of Atlanta. I feel no kind of danger walking through the suburbs or being in any part of Metro Atlanta. Now, of course, you have to be smart about where you are. You know, if you go looking for trouble in a dark alley at night in Atlanta, that's not exactly the best place to be. So I wouldn't recommend that in Atlanta or any part of Georgia. But in general, I would say I don't feel any kind of danger in any part of the state. I think in general, the state of Georgia does a very good job of making sure that all of the cities are very safe. One very common question that we often get is about the cost of living here in Metro Atlanta. And it's like, in these videos, we talk about, yeah, the cost of living is super low in Atlanta, especially compared to other parts of the country. And it is a little lower than other parts of the country. Home prices are still a little lower than other parts of the country, but you should definitely know that Atlanta cost of living is rising very quickly. I think many people realize that other parts of the country, other parts of the US, are more expensive than Atlanta. And so many people are moving here to Atlanta all the time. In fact, we have a lot of investors who buy property, buy real estate here in Atlanta because they know that so many people are moving to Atlanta trying to find that lower cost of living. And this is causing the cost of living to increase at a higher rate here in Atlanta than other parts of the country, especially when it comes to major US cities. Of course, the cost of living in Atlanta is not less than like somewhere in the Midwest where there is like a much smaller economy. We're really not comparing Atlanta to Kansas. We're comparing Atlanta to New York or LA or Miami. And so compared to those major US cities, the cost of living is still a bit lower here in Atlanta. And the cost of homes, I would say, is very quickly catching up to some of the other major US cities. Certainly things like property taxes in general, they tend to be a little lower than other major US cities. Home insurance is far lower here in Georgia than in places like Florida, where the home insurance is like through the roof. For example, for my very average size home in Metro Atlanta, I pay about $1,500 a year for homeowners insurance. So this is apparently a really good deal compared to other parts of the US. You guys from Florida who call and tell me about how much the homeowners insurance there is just insanely high. So it is a bit lower, the cost of living here in Metro Atlanta than other parts of the US, but it's compared to the major US cities. Another big one is whether or not there are things to do. I know a lot of people, they think of Georgia and Atlanta as being like super country and like there's nothing to do and it's very rural. And the fact is that Atlanta is not rural at all. There is a ton of things to do all around the Atlanta area. Sure, there are less things to do in like the suburbs. It's not like the city of Atlanta where everything stays open super late and you have no problem finding restaurants and shopping and museums and parks all around the city of Atlanta. In the suburbs, you can still find some of these things, but obviously there's not as many. And then also things in the suburbs don't stay open as late. For example, in Marietta, where I live, pretty much everything closes at like 9 o'clock, maybe 10 o'clock, for like restaurants or something like that. But anything after 10 p.m. in one of the suburbs of Metro Atlanta, it's like a ghost town. Everything is closed. There's nothing to do after 10 p.m. in the suburbs. But in Atlanta, still plenty of things to do all around the city. And then the commute is a big one. And a lot of people talk about the amount of traffic that we have here. The truth is that the majority of the traffic is on the interstate system. Here in Marietta, I don't have to get in a whole lot of traffic to go to the grocery store or to go to whatever it is I'm leaving the house to do. I really don't even want to leave the house. I just want to be here all the time working from home. But so if you live in the suburbs and you work in Atlanta, then yeah, absolutely, you're going to have to deal with that rush hour traffic on the interstate system, Interstate 75, 85, 285, 20, Highway 400. These are where you're going to find the majority of the rush hour traffic. But here in the suburbs, going from place to place, it's not nearly as bad. And then lastly, and most importantly, there are a few suburbs of Metro Atlanta that are a very good mix of the suburban feel and the urban feel. You can kind of get that city-like feel, and you can not be super close on top of your neighbors. Plenty of space, and the home prices are super reasonable. The best city in all of Metro Atlanta for that is Sandy Springs. You can see a video about Sandy Springs right here where we talk all about the city and what it's like to live there. I'll see you in the next one.